When I turned the handle of that bedroom door on our very first night, I remember thinking, this moment feels heavier than it should. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, music like the air itself had paused to watch what I would do next. My heart wasn't racing the way it does in movies. It was slower, deeper, like each beat was asking a question I wasn't sure I could answer. I was 52 then. He was barely past boyhood. And yet there I was. Before I go any further, let me say this. What unfolded next wasn't reckless desire or some wild fantasy. It was that quiet point where restraint loosens its grip, where curiosity and fear sit side by side, music, and you realize you've stepped into unfamiliar territory without quite knowing when it happened. Stay with me until the end. Some stories don't reveal their truth all at once. My name is Marianne. Today I'm 68, but back then I was a woman who believed her story had already been written and neatly closed. I had been widowed for years. My children were grown, living their own lives. My days were orderly, predictable. I managed a small boutique downtown, tailored suits, pressed shirts, quiet customers who nodded politely and left. Life was peaceful and painfully empty. That afternoon, when Lucas first walked into the shop, nothing about him screamed change. Simple clothes, careful posture. The kind of young man who seemed unsure where to put his hands when standing still. He asked for help choosing something appropriate for his mother, he said. Music, we talked about fabric, colors, fit, normal things. Yet, I remember thinking how attentively he listened, as if my words mattered more than the purchase itself. He thanked me, smiled shyly, and left. I didn't think about him again until he came back, music then again, always something small he needed. A tie, music advice, a second opinion. The girls at work teased me gently. Music, I laughed it off too loudly now that I think about it. But at home alone, I caught myself replaying our conversations. That disturbed me more than I care to admit. I told myself it was harmless, a harmless attention, until one evening just before closing when the shop was quiet and the city outside had softened into twilight. He stood in front of me, hands clasped, eyes steady. I don't come here for clothes anymore, he said. The honesty of it stole my breath. I tried to shut it down. I said all the sensible things about age, about appearances, about logic. He listened, then calmly said he understood and that he still felt what he felt. I sent him away that night. And when he stopped coming, I realized something terrifying. I missed him. That's the part people don't understand. How absence can be louder than presence. Weeks later, we met for coffee. Neutral ground, public space, safe. We talked, really talked about grief, loneliness, fear, that strange space between who you were and who you've become. We agreed on one thing, slow, no promises, no labels, just time. Months passed like that. Conversations stretching longer, silences growing comfortable, touches that lingered just a second too long, enough to be noticed, never enough to be named. Until the night we decided to stop pretending we were only talking. The apartment wasn't romantic, small, clean, almost clinical. But when the door closed behind us, the world outside disappeared. We stood there, unsure who should move first. When we finally did, it wasn't rushed. It was careful, almost reverent, as if both of us understood that crossing this line meant there was no pretending afterward. Clothes came away quietly. No drama, no urgency. And then came the moment that shook me. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. Overwhelmed, uncertain, confronted with a reality my body and mind hadn't prepared for. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the realization that this experience would demand patience from both of us. I remember thinking, am I capable of meeting this moment without losing myself? He noticed my hesitation instantly, asked if we should stop. His concern was genuine, not performative. That mattered more than anything. We slowed down even further. Words replaced action. Reassurance replaced expectation. Nothing happened all at once. Nothing was taken. Everything was offered. The beginning wasn't easy. Newness rarely is. But what stayed with me wasn't discomfort. It was care. He waited, adjusted, listened, and somewhere between those pauses, I felt something unlock inside me. Not desire alone, but trust. We didn't chase perfection that night. We chose gentleness. Later, lying beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing even out, I stared at the ceiling and laughed softly to myself. So, this is what it feels like to be alive again, I thought. Not young, alive. There's a difference. I didn't know what the future would demand from us. Judgment, difficulty, heartache, all of it waited patiently beyond that room. But in that moment, wrapped in quiet uncertainty and unexpected warmth, I understood something that changed me forever. Life doesn't end when society says it should. It waits for you to choose it again. The morning after that night didn't feel like a victory or a mistake. It felt quiet. The kind of quiet where you wake up unsure whether you crossed a line or finally stepped into yourself. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, landing on the wall instead of our faces. I stayed still, listening. His breathing was slow, even young but steady, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I wondered how many mornings like this I was allowed to want. We didn't talk much when we got up. No grand declarations, no awkward apologies, just coffee, shared glances, a softness that hadn't existed before. And then reality started knocking. We kept seeing each other, but something had shifted. What had been curiosity now carried weight, responsibility, consequence. I began to notice how often I checked the door before entering a cafe, how carefully I chose where we sat, how I measured laughter so it wouldn't draw attention. He noticed too. One evening while we were walking in silence, he said almost casually, "Are you ashamed of me?" That question hit harder than any accusation could have. I wasn't ashamed of him. I was terrified of what loving him would say about me, about my age, my role, the expectations people had quietly placed on my shoulders decades ago. We talked that night longer than we ever had about judgment, about family, about how love doesn't ask permission, but society always does. He listened. Really listened. And then said something that still echoes in my mind. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your life. I'm asking you to let me be part of it." That's when I realized this wasn't infatuation. It was intention. We chose discretion, not secrecy. There's a difference. We didn't hide because we were ashamed. We waited because we knew the world wouldn't be gentle. Over time, I started noticing myself again. Not the mirror. I avoided that. But the feeling of myself. I walked differently, spoke more confidently. I laughed without rehearsing at first. And then came the hardest step, my children. I invited them over for lunch, pretending it was just another Sunday. I cooked too much food like I always did when I was nervous. When we sat down, my hands trembled so badly I had to set my glass down before it spilled. "I've been seeing someone," I said. At first, there were smiles, relief even. Then I told them his age. The room changed instantly. Not loud, sharp. Questions came like accusations, motives, intentions, warnings disguised as concern. I tried to explain, but explanation rarely survives fear. That afternoon ended in raised voices and slammed doors. I sat alone afterwards, staring at untouched dessert, wondering when loving someone became an act of betrayal. He didn't tell me to fight them. He didn't tell me to choose. He simply stayed. That's how I knew. The months that followed were brutal. Silence from one child, conditional acceptance from another, friends who suddenly forgot to invite me places, strangers who stared just long enough to make sure I noticed. But also moments of quiet joy. Cooking together, long conversations that wandered nowhere and everywhere, learning each other's rhythms, negotiating energy, expectations, patience. Living together was an education. He was learning adulthood. I was unlearning invisibility. We argued about messes, about sleep schedules, about plans that stretched further than I could see. But every disagreement ended the same way, with conversation, not distance. Intimacy changed too. It wasn't about urgency anymore. It became something slower, more deliberate. We learned each other's limits. Learned when closeness didn't need to lead anywhere else to be meaningful. That surprised me most of all. Years passed. Some relationships around us faded. Others deepened. One child came back fully. The other took longer, but eventually returned with softer eyes and a willingness to try. When he asked me to marry him, it wasn't dramatic. No audience, no performance, just certainty. "I don't want a future that doesn't include you," he said. Marriage didn't erase the challenges. It highlighted them. Age differences don't disappear with rings. They show up in energy levels, in health scares, in the quiet moments when you realize time doesn't treat you equally. When I got sick years later, I saw love in its truest form. Not passion, not devotion, care. He learned routines, asked doctors questions, sat beside hospital beds without complaining, was gentle when I was scared, and firm when I tried to give up. That's when I stopped worrying about what I couldn't give him because he never measured love that way. Today, people still stare sometimes. Receptionists still assume. Strangers still whisper. But none of that carries weight anymore. Because love that survives judgment becomes immune to it. I'm older now, slower, wiser. And I've learned something I wish more women knew. Desire doesn't expire. Connection doesn't belong to youth. And love doesn't ask for age. It asks for honesty. If I had chosen safety over truth, I would have lived quietly. Instead, I lived fully, and I would do it all again. To you, my beautiful viewers, if you were offered a love that didn't fit the rules but felt undeniably real, would you protect yourself or would you step forward anyway? Tell me in the comments. I truly read them. If this story stirred something inside you, like it, share it, and subscribe with the bell on. Because sometimes the love you least expect is the one that teaches you how to live.